Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The night was unusually cold, the kind of night that made even the walls shiver with every gust of wind. Thunder rumbled across the sky, and heavy rain fell in sheets, drumming endlessly on the roof of Emika's luxurious duplex. Inside, the house was warm, lit with soft chandeliers, and filled with the smell of freshly baked bread and lavender-scented candles. Adiz, dressed in a silk robe, lounged lazily on a plush velvet couch, sipping her green tea and flipping through TV channels. Her perfectly manicured fingers paused when she heard a knock, barely audible, but persistent. She frowned and turned to the window. Who would dare disturb their peace at this hour? The knock came again, followed by a weak voice calling out. Adiz hissed and rose, wrapping her robe tighter around her body as she approached the front door. She peered through the peephole and saw a disheveled old woman standing in the rain, hunched over with a crooked leg, clutching a worn-out nylon bag to her chest. The woman looked pitiful. Her soaked clothes clung to her frail frame, her hair stuck to her face, and her eyes, though dim, carried a strange sadness. "Who are you?" Adiz called out. The woman tried to speak, but her voice was lost in the wind. Adiz's face twisted in disgust. "Get away from here. Go beg somewhere else," she snapped, slamming the door shut with so much force the handle trembled. The sound echoed through the house, startling the house help who had been cleaning the dining area. Adiz turned back, muttering about crazy beggars and stubborn old witches who refused to die in peace. She strutted back to her couch, completely unmoved by what had just happened. Outside, the rain grew harsher. The old woman remained at the gate, leaning on it for support, her entire body trembling from the cold and the heartbreak of rejection. She hadn't come to beg. She had come to see someone. Someone she had raised with her own hands. Someone who used to cling to her leg as a boy and cry when she left for the market. She stared at the closed door with tear-filled eyes, whispering a name, Emika. But even if she screamed it, no one would hear her through the storm or recognize the pain behind it. With nowhere else to go and her strength failing her, she slid slowly down against the gate, curling into herself like a wounded animal. Her clothes soaked up the water on the ground, and the bag she clutched, containing nothing more than a faded photo album, got drenched. But she didn't let it go. That was all she had left. Photos of the son who now lived in this house. The son who hadn't called in over a year. The son whose wife just slammed the door in her face. Inside, Adiz continued her evening, oblivious to the gravity of her actions. She called Emika, who was working late at the office, just to complain. Some mad woman came knocking. "These beggars are getting bold, though. Imagine standing at our gate under the rain like a ghost." I chased her away fast. Emika chuckled nervously on the other end, too distracted with work to process her words. "Good," he said absently. "You did the right thing." That was all she needed to hear. Adiz smiled, feeling validated. To her, it was just another uninvited stranger. But outside that gate lay a mother who had walked miles with her bad leg just to see her only child. A mother who had sold her last set of wrappers years ago to pay his school fees. A woman who once stood in the rain too, waiting outside his university hall just to hug him after graduation, though he had told her not to come. That woman was now shivering under a tree nearby, too weak to stand again. But fate is never blind. The story of the woman at the door had only just begun, and when the truth would come to light, it would shake the very foundation of Adiz's world. Mama Neka was born into poverty, but she lived her early life with pride, faith, and dignity. From a young age, she learned to survive with little, and when her husband died suddenly from a construction accident, she was left with nothing but a toddler in her arms and a crooked leg she sustained during the chaos of trying to save him. That child was Emika. He was barely 2 when she started roasting corn by the roadside and doing laundry for wealthier households just to feed him. She tied him on her back while she worked, carrying him through dust and storm, never once complaining. When other women mocked her limp or advised her to give the child away, she simply smiled and said, "God gave him to me. and he will give me strength to raise him. She never remarried. Instead, she poured her entire life into raising Emeka. She was at his school gates every day, sometimes with torn slippers and worn wrappers, always with food or words of encouragement. The boy grew up seeing her as his world, clinging to her every night, whispering, "Mama, I will build you a big house one day." That dream kept her alive. Despite all odds, she managed to send him to secondary school, and later, through a combination of scholarships and relentless hustling, he made it to the university. Mama Nneka sold her last 2 goats to buy him a laptop when he said he needed one. She trekked miles just to see him when he fell ill on campus, even though he begged her not to come because his friends would laugh at her appearance. That day, she stood outside his hostel gates for 5 hours, her feet swollen and bleeding from the walk. She never told him how hard the journey was, only that she was proud of him. And when he finally graduated, she arrived uninvited, standing quietly at the back of the hall, dressed in a simple gown she borrowed from a neighbor. She clapped louder than anyone when his name was called. That night, she slept on the corridor floor of a stranger's shop because she couldn't afford transport back to the village. But to her it was worth it. Her son was now a graduate, and nothing else mattered. She believed that better days were finally here, that the years of hunger and pain were behind her. However, things started to change when Emeka got his first job in the city. At first, he called her every weekend, sending small amounts of money when he could. But as promotions came and his circle changed, the calls became monthly, then rare, and eventually stopped. The money reduced too. Mama Nneka tried to understand. She told herself he was busy, that city life was hard, that he'd come around. When she called, he would sometimes answer and speak in rushed tones, then end the call quickly. Sometimes Adiz would pick and say, "He's not around," and hang up before she could explain who she was. Her heart sank each time, but she kept the faith. She kept his room intact in their mud house, hoping one day he would visit. She told the neighbors proudly, "My son is doing well. He will come and take me soon." But the seasons changed and the years passed, and he didn't come. Her leg got worse, her body weaker. Still, she waited, praying every night by the small candlelight, clutching his old photos. Until that day, she finally gathered the courage to go find him. She would remind him, face to face, of the woman who gave everything for him. When Emeka first arrived in the city, he was hungry for success. He remembered his mother's sacrifices and used them as fuel. Every overtime shift, every hustle. He told himself it was all to give her a better life. And he meant it. In the early days, he rented a small room in a shared apartment, living on noodles and bread, but he still managed to send something to Mama. Then came a breakthrough, a job in a reputable tech firm, thanks to a friend who vouched for his brilliance. He seized the opportunity, working like a man possessed. His performance was unmatched, and soon promotions came. Money started flowing in. He moved into his own apartment and changed his wardrobe. Along the way, he met Adiz, a stunning, sharp-tongued woman from a wealthy family. She didn't just attract him, she challenged him. She made him feel powerful. When they began dating, Emeka hid everything about his past, especially his mother. He painted a picture of a well-off background, afraid that Adiz would look down on him otherwise. Each lie created a distance, and over time, he began to believe them himself. At first, Adiz was just another milestone for him, but eventually he fell in love, or at least he thought he did. She came from class, and he wanted to belong. Her parents were not impressed with his background, so he crafted a new one. He told Adiz that his mother died years ago. That lie stuck, and he did everything to maintain it. Even when Mama called, he would rush outside to speak in whispers or ignore the calls completely. He justified it by saying he would make it all right once he was stable. But stability came and comfort followed. He bought a duplex, a car, and started investing. But Mama remained in her mud house. When she asked if she could visit, he made excuses. "Not now, Mama. Things are still rough." That same week, he took Adiz to Zanzibar for a getaway. Mama heard about the trip from a neighbor's daughter who saw photos online. Still, she forgave him. He was her son. She believed he loved her, even if he was confused by the city's ways. She only hoped that one day, when he looked in the mirror, he would remember who made that reflection possible. It wasn't that Emeka hated his mother. He loved her in a way he couldn't explain, but he had grown ashamed of her. Her disability, her poverty, her village accent, they all reminded him of where he came from, and he wanted to bury that past deep. Adi's influence didn't help. She had no tolerance for local people, often calling them dirty or backward. One day, when Emeka mistakenly mentioned that he once lived in a village, she laughed and said, "Thank God you don't look like where you came from." That comment hit him deeply, but he said nothing. From that moment, he knew he could never tell her the truth about Mama. And so, with each lie, with each silence, the gap widened until even his conscience started whispering. But he ignored it. After all, hadn't he worked hard enough to deserve peace? Didn't he deserve to finally enjoy life without guilt? But deep inside, a storm was brewing. He just didn't know that the storm had taken the form of a bent, tired woman limping slowly toward his gate on a rainy night, his mother, with nothing left but love and sorrow. Adi's had grown up in abundance. Her father was a retired ambassador, and her mother owned several boutiques across Lagos and Abuja. From a young age, she was taught to value appearances above all else. She was taught that success was measured by designer bags, pristine nails, and being seen at the right places with the right people. Her beauty was her badge, and her attitude was its weapon. She was never taught to respect people beneath her, only to tolerate them. When she met Emeka, she liked his ambition, but what won her heart was the way he made her feel like royalty. He never spoke of hardship or struggle. In her mind, he came from a refined background like hers, and she liked that. The moment she stepped into his life, she took over like a queen claiming her throne. She rearranged his wardrobe, upgraded his furniture, and dismissed his housekeeper for someone with a better accent. When they moved into the new duplex, she chose everything, down to the type of throw pillows on the guest bed. And with each decision, she reminded Emeka that he was lucky to have her. Over time, she became the commander of the home, her word final. She didn't hide her distaste for anyone who didn't meet her standards. The house help, a humble girl named Nkechi, often bore the brunt of her insults. "Why do you walk like that? Do you think this is your father's house? Your village stench is following you around." Emeka said nothing. He would sigh and retreat to his study, avoiding confrontation. Adi's took his silence as agreement. One time, a poor neighbor came to ask for help with school fees. Adi's laughed and said, "This is not a charity home. Go and beg your mates." She saw humility as weakness and simplicity as foolishness. She dreamed of being the wife of a man who would one day be on magazine covers, not the son of a disabled roadside corn seller. In her eyes, poverty was a disease to be avoided, and people like that strange woman who knocked at the gate deserved to be ignored. So when she slammed the door that night, she felt nothing. To her, it was just another intruder. But Nkechi had seen the woman's eyes, and something about the way they stared through the gate haunted her deeply. "Madam," she said softly that night, "I think that woman needs help." Adi snapped, "If you talk nonsense again, you'll sleep outside with her." That statement echoed in the house as the rain pounded harder. Nkechi quietly crept to the kitchen, warmed a small bowl of rice, wrapped it in a nylon, and snuck out through the back door. She found the old woman huddled under the tree near the gate, shivering. Without a word, she handed her the food and a worn blanket. The woman looked up, her lips trembling, and whispered, "Thank you." Nkechi nodded and ran back inside before she could be caught. Meanwhile, Adiz was laughing over a phone call with her friends, recounting how she chased away a crazy old beggar. She described it as a highlight of her day. Pride oozed from her voice, and Emeka, who had returned by then, only offered a tired smile. He didn't ask about the woman. He didn't think to. But as he went to bed that night, a strange heaviness settled in his chest. He ignored it, thinking it was exhaustion. He had no idea that just a few meters from their gate, his past was waiting patiently in the cold, and his wife had just unknowingly slammed the door on the woman who had once sheltered him with nothing but love and broken limbs. The day Emeka got married was meant to be the happiest day of Mama Neka's life. She had waited for that moment since the day she held him in her arms as a newborn, whispering dreams of his future into his tiny ears. When she first heard the news of his engagement, it wasn't from Emeka himself, but from a distant neighbor's son who spotted his pre-wedding photos on Instagram. At first, she didn't believe it. Why would her only son plan a wedding and not inform her? But as more pictures surfaced online and even her church members began congratulating her, she realized the bitter truth. Emeka was getting married, and she had not been invited. Her heart ached with disbelief. Still, she decided to go. She borrowed money from a neighbor, bought a second-hand gown, and took the night bus to Lagos with trembling hope in her heart. She arrived on the wedding morning, her bag clutched tightly, her legs sore from the journey, but her heart still full of love. She stood at the back of the massive church venue, unsure of whether to go in, afraid of what she might find. When she finally mustered the courage to walk in, she sat quietly in the last pew, hiding her limp as best she could. Her eyes welled with tears when she saw Emeka at the altar, looking dashing in his blue tuxedo, smiling beside his stunning bride. It should have been a proud moment for her, but no one recognized her. No one acknowledged her presence. As the ceremony ended and people rushed forward to take photos with the couple, she slowly stood and walked toward them. "Emeka," she called gently, her voice trembling. He turned, his smile fading slightly when he saw her. "Mama," he said in a low, uncertain tone. Before he could say anything else, Adiz approached and asked sharply, "Who is this?" Emeka hesitated. "She's someone from the village. An old neighbor." The words hit her like a slap. A neighbor? After everything? The crowd moved on oblivious. Adiz gave her a cold once-over and turned back to her bridesmaids. Mama Neka nodded slowly, turned around, and walked back out, holding her tears until she reached the street. That night, she sat on the pavement opposite the wedding reception, listening to the music and laughter, wiping tears with the edge of her wrapper, feeling like a ghost at the edge of her own child's joy. When she returned to the village, her health began to decline. Her neighbors noticed the change. She no longer smiled when passing by, no longer sang in the evenings while cooking. She barely ate. The rejection cut deeper than any wound. Still, she didn't speak badly of her son. She only told those who asked that Emeka is busy. Lagos is far. But inside, she was breaking. Every call that went unanswered chipped at her spirit. Her body began to weaken, and her limp worsened. But her heart? That was the most damaged part of all. She didn't want to be a burden. All she wanted was to be acknowledged, to be held by the son she raised, to be told that she still mattered. But that wedding, with all its glamour and grandeur, had become her funeral in disguise, a celebration that buried the last of her dignity. Yet even then, she never cursed him. Instead, she prayed for him, prayed that the woman he married would love him better than she was ever allowed to love him. What she didn't know was that Adiz's love came with conditions, and that one day, she herself would become the victim of her pride. After the wedding, Emeka's guilt grew like a tumor he couldn't treat. Every time he saw his wedding photos on their living room wall, he remembered his mother's face that day, fragile, hopeful, and then silently heartbroken. But he had buried the truth so deep that uncovering it now would only cause chaos. Adiz believed his parents were long dead, taken by a car crash when he was young. He had spun the tale so convincingly that even he sometimes forgot the real story. The shame consumed him. He hated that he was ashamed of the woman who once tied her stomach so he could eat. But the truth was he had allowed himself to become the kind of man he once vowed never to be, one who traded his soul for status. He kept telling himself he'd make it up to her someday, when Adiz wouldn't be watching, when the timing was right. But that timing never came. Every phone call from Mama went unanswered. Sometimes he watched her name flash on the screen and just let it ring. He'd tell himself, "I'll call her back tomorrow," but that tomorrow never came. He knew Adiz wouldn't accept her. She often boasted about how she would never tolerate any uncivilized in-law in her home. She had disowned a cousin for marrying a mechanic, and once said she could never respect a woman who couldn't speak fluent English. Emeka feared what she would do if she discovered his mother sold roasted corn to raise him. So he buried Mama Neka under layers of lies, protecting his marriage at the cost of his soul. At work, he was known as a rising star. At home, he played the perfect husband. But in the quiet hours of the night, when Adiz was asleep and the house was still, he would sit in the dark with his thoughts, haunted by memories. He'd recall her sitting by the firelight, mending his torn school shorts, humming softly. He remembered how she once skipped meals for 2 days just so he could pay his WEC fees. He remembered everything, but remembering wasn't enough. It was never enough. Each time he sent money, it was through a neighbor or an anonymous transfer. He couldn't bear to speak to her. He believed money could cover the silence, but it only made it louder. Mama never once complained about the irregular support. In fact, the last time she managed to speak with him, she said, "My son, as long as you're happy, I am happy too." He had wept that night, quietly, in his bathroom, pressing a towel to his mouth to stifle the sobs. But he never told Adiz. He never told anyone. The lie had grown too big. And now it had reached the gate of his home in the form of a disabled, rain-soaked woman. And he didn't even know it. While he sat comfortably under warm lights and spoke of expansion plans and investments, his own mother had slept by a tree, sick and shivering, because he was too afraid to say, "This is my mother." And the price of that fear would soon come crashing down in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. Back in the village, Mama Neka's world shrank further. The days felt longer, the nights colder. Her small hut leaked when it rained, and her food stock rarely lasted through the week. Yet she told no one of her pain. She still smiled at her neighbors, still greeted the children who ran by her compound. But once the gates of her home were closed, she curled into a ball on her mat, staring at the roof and whispering prayers for a son who no longer saw her. Her health deteriorated steadily. The limp became more pronounced, and her eyes, once filled with life, grew dim. She visited the village health center when she could, but the nurses were overworked and medicine was scarce. Most days, she boiled herbs and applied ointments to her aching joints. She saved every naira she had not for herself, but for a plan she had built quietly in her heart, a plan to go and find Emeka, face to face. She believed that if he saw her again, something inside him would awaken. She believed love couldn't vanish completely. So she waited until the harmattan winds settled and borrowed money for the journey. She told no one, afraid they'd discourage her. She packed her most precious belongings, a plastic bag containing Emeka's baby photo, his first report card, and a worn envelope of church offerings she'd saved up for years to bless him with. She also carried a piece of the wrapper she had worn the day she gave birth to him. Everything else she left behind. The journey was painful. The bus ride was rough, and passengers stared at her disapprovingly as she coughed and shifted uncomfortably. At every stop, she asked for directions to her son's estate. When she finally arrived in the city, she found the gates of his home as intimidating as the strangers who walked past her without a glance. But she didn't care. Her son was inside. All she had to do was knock, and he would open. But fate had other plans. Instead of her son, it was his wife who answered. A woman with hard eyes and a sharp tongue. Adiz didn't ask who she was or what she wanted. She only saw an old, wet, haggard woman and slammed the door. Mama Neka stood there in shock, too stunned to speak. She recognized the woman. She had seen her in the wedding photos. That was her son's wife. Her heart crumbled. She staggered to the tree nearby, unable to walk any further. She sat in the cold, clutching her soaked bag, whispering to herself, maybe tomorrow will be better. But tomorrow wouldn't come the way she expected. Tomorrow would arrive in the form of collapse, sirens, and secrets revealed. She had come in peace, with love. But love, it seemed, was no longer enough. The journey that brought Mama Neka to her son's gate was not only physical but spiritual. Each mile she traveled felt like shedding another piece of pride, replacing it with fragile hope. She had spent 2 weeks gathering the courage, brushing off the doubts, ignoring the whispers in her mind that told her she was no longer wanted. It wasn't an easy decision. Her joints ached with every step, and her limp was worse than ever. But something deep inside her, perhaps the memory of Emeka's childhood laughter, pushed her forward. She took the early morning bus, packed with strangers who eyed her with mild irritation as she climbed in slowly. Her worn slippers slapped against the floor of the bus as she moved toward an empty corner. No one offered her help. Her fingers gripped her nylon bag tightly, the bag that held the remnants of her motherhood. Old photos, a paper with Emeka's name printed boldly at his convocation, and a rosary she used to pray for his success. She arrived in Lagos exhausted and disoriented. The noise, the smoke, the indifferent crowd, it all reminded her of how far she had fallen behind the world. She asked for directions politely, and some people ignored her, while others waved vaguely. A kind bus conductor finally helped her into a kiki that took her toward the estate gate. The kiki man charged her more than usual, muttering under his breath about village people bringing problems to the city. Still, she paid without complaint, digging into the folds of her blouse to retrieve coins saved with difficulty. When she reached the estate, the security men wouldn't even open the gate. "Do you have an appointment?" one asked rudely. She told them she was looking for her son. They laughed. One of them offered her water, perhaps out of pity, but didn't let her through. "Come back with a phone number," he said, "or call the person." But she had no mobile phone. She had relied on memory and prayer. After waiting for hours under a hot sun that turned to a stormy evening, she finally snuck past a fence when a delivery van was let in. Limping slowly through the estate, she found the duplex. It was bigger than she imagined, a far cry from the mud walls that had once cradled her son. She whispered a blessing and walked to the door. Her knock was hesitant at first. 1, 2, then a pause. When no one came, she knocked again, louder this time, praying with each tap that it would be Emeka who opened it. But fate was cruel. Adiz opened the door, stared at her soaked frame with disdain, and didn't even let her speak. "Get out of here before I call the police," she snapped. "You people should stop disturbing decent homes." Then, without another word, she slammed the door. It felt like the final nail. Mama Neka remained frozen in place, her feet planted like roots beneath the rain, the bag still pressed to her chest. She didn't knock again. Her knees buckled, and she slowly made her way to a tree just beside the gate, where she sat and allowed the rain to baptize her pain. She didn't cry. She just whispered Emeka's name over and over again until the world around her faded into darkness. The night deepened, and the storm roared louder, as though nature itself was crying out in protest at what had just happened. Adiz returned to the couch, feeling no remorse for her actions. She called her friends on a video chat, laughing loudly as she recounted the incident like a scene from a comedy skit. "The way I slammed that door, eh? You should have seen her face," she said between giggles. Her friends joined in, one of them saying, "That's how they'll pretend to be sick or lost, hoping you'll pity them and give the money." Adiz agreed, declaring, "I don't do pity. I do class." Emeka arrived shortly after, drenched from the rain, having left the office late due to an emergency. He greeted his wife with a tired smile, asking if anything strange had happened while he was away. Adiz waved him off. "Just one useless old woman disturbing the peace. Don't mind her, I handled it." Emeka nodded and went upstairs to shower, the tension in his shoulders growing heavier without explanation. Outside, the rain showed no signs of stopping. The house help, Nkechi, had been quietly observing everything. Something about the woman at the gate had unsettled her deeply. Her eyes, they reminded her of her own grandmother, the one who raised her when her parents died. She couldn't sleep. The guilt clawed at her until she slipped downstairs, packed a small bowl of rice, covered it in foil, and tiptoed to the back entrance. Carefully, she crept to the tree, her heart pounding. The woman was still there, sitting upright, but shaking. Her lips moved faintly, muttering something like a prayer. "Mama," Nkechi whispered. The woman turned, eyes heavy with exhaustion. "I brought food," Nkechi said, setting the bowl beside her. She removed a wrapper from her waist and placed it over the woman's shoulders. "Please eat." The old woman looked at her with gratitude too deep for words and placed a trembling hand on hers. "God bless you," she murmured. God bless your kindness." Nkechi's heart broke. She wanted to ask who she was, where she came from, but something told her this woman had already spoken her truth 1,000 times, and no one had listened. Back inside, Nkechi watched from the kitchen window as the woman slowly ate, her movements slow and painful. She looked too weak to stand. The rain had soaked her bones, and the chill of the night seemed determined to take her. Nkechi knew she couldn't bring her inside. Adiz would fire her without hesitation. So she stayed awake, peeking out every few minutes, praying the woman would survive the night. When morning came, the sky was pale and cloudless, as though mocking the storm it had just unleashed. Nkechi ran outside to check on her, but the woman was no longer sitting upright. She had collapsed. Her food remained unfinished, her bag lying beside her. "Mama! Mama!" Nkechi screamed. Emeka heard the commotion and came running. When he saw the figure on the ground, something inside him shifted. Something felt familiar. The curve of her face. The brokenness in her stillness. It made his chest tighten with unexplainable fear. "Call an ambulance," he shouted. The woman who had been left outside like trash was now surrounded by panic, and no one yet knew the truth of who she really was. The sirens echoed through the estate, drawing neighbors to their windows. The ambulance doors flung open as paramedics rushed to lift the unconscious old woman into the van. Emeka followed closely, gripping the gate with one hand, his heart pounding wildly. He didn't understand why his entire body was trembling. He had seen many homeless people before, many elderly beggars wandering the streets, but something about this woman was different. As they drove to the hospital, he kept glancing at her face, trying to place the feeling in his chest, the inexplicable sorrow, the rising tide of guilt that felt too personal to ignore. Adiz didn't bother following them. She was still irritated that the drama had escalated. "This is why I don't show kindness," she muttered. "One act, and suddenly you're involved in other people's wallah." She rolled her eyes and poured herself another glass of juice. Nkechi, however, couldn't stop crying. She had seen death before. She had buried her mother with her own hands at 16. And the way that old woman looked, she feared this might be the end. At the hospital, Emeka waited in the corridor while the doctors worked. A nurse came out asking for details, but he had none to give. "Do you know her name?" the nurse asked. I'm not sure," Emeka replied, ashamed. "I think she might be someone from my village." It was a weak lie. But the nurse nodded and went back inside. Minutes later, another nurse brought out the woman's nylon bag and handed it to Emeka. "Maybe something in here can help us identify her," she said. Emeka took it hesitantly, opening it slowly. The first thing he pulled out was a faded photograph of a young Emeka, maybe 7 years old, seated on the lap of a smiling woman with a crooked leg and bright eyes. He gasped. His knees gave out beneath him. It was her. His mother. "Oh my God! Mama!" he whispered, pressing the photo to his chest, tears flooding his eyes. Memories came crashing in like a tidal wave. Her voice, her scent, the songs she used to hum, everything. And now, she was behind those doors, fighting for her life after spending the night in the rain because of him. Because he had been too ashamed. Back at the house, Nkechi couldn't take the silence any longer. She knocked gently on the bedroom door, where Adiz was lounging. "Madam, I think you need to know something," she said. Adiz frowned. "What is it now?" Nkechi took a deep breath and said, "That woman, she might be Oga's mother." The silence that followed was thunderous. Adiz laughed harshly. "His mother? Don't be ridiculous. He said she died years ago." But Nkechi stood her ground. "I saw how he looked at her, and I saw what she carried. Old photos. Of him. As a child. The way she whispered his name when she ate, it was not a stranger's love." Adiz's face changed. Doubt began to creep in, wrapping around her like smoke. For the first time in years, she felt fear, not of poverty, not of judgment, but of what it would mean if she had truly slammed the door on her own mother-in-law. A woman who came in the rain with nothing but love. And now she might never get the chance to say sorry. The hospital hallway smelled of antiseptic and dread. Emeka sat slumped in the waiting chair outside the emergency ward. His eyes bloodshot from tears he didn't know he was capable of shedding. He stared blankly at the floor, the photograph of himself and his mother still clutched in his hand like a lifeline. The past was no longer something he could keep buried. It had risen from the ground, drenched in rain and silence, and come to confront him at his doorstep. Nurses rushed in and out of the ward, and every time the doors creaked open, Emeka's heart stopped. The image of his mother, collapsed by the tree, refused to leave his mind. What if she never woke up? What if those cruel words from his wife were the last thing she ever heard? He gritted his teeth, guilt twisting in his stomach. The weight of his betrayal was unbearable. She had loved him so selflessly, fought so hard, and yet he had denied her the dignity of being acknowledged. He whispered a broken prayer, pleading with God not to let this be the end. Not like this. At the house, dawn broke with awkward silence. Adiz had barely slept. Though she pretended to be unfazed, something about Nkechi's words had pierced through her arrogance. She had dismissed many people in her life, but none had ever been followed by such consequences. For the first time in years, she wondered about her husband's past, the one he never shared. Had she really believed his parents were dead? Or had she simply never cared enough to ask questions? When Emeka returned home after sunrise, his face was pale and drawn. He walked in without greeting her and collapsed onto the couch. "It's my mother," he said hoarsely. "The woman you threw out. That was my mother." The words sliced through the silence like a knife. Adiz opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She stared at him, stunned. "You lied to me," she finally said. "You told me your parents were gone." Emeka looked up at her, eyes full of rage and sorrow. "I lied to protect her. From you." The gravity of his words settled heavily between them. Adiz felt her stomach twist. She had mocked that woman, slapped her with words, left her to die in the rain. And now, she was facing the possibility that her husband might never forgive her. Nkechi quietly entered the living room and placed a bowl of hot pap on the table. "Sir, I'm sorry," she whispered, her eyes wet. Emeka nodded, the first acknowledgement of her kindness. "You tried," he said softly. "You did more than I did." He stood abruptly. "I'm going back to the hospital. If anything changes," he didn't finish the sentence. He walked out, leaving Adiz rooted to the floor. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, then dropped it. There were no words she could say to fix this. No apology grand enough. Only silence and guilt, echoing through the walls of the home she had once ruled with pride. Now, it felt like a prison of her own making. Back at the hospital, Emeka sat by the edge of his mother's bed, unable to take his eyes off her. She looked so small, so fragile, with an oxygen tube in her nose and an 4 in her arm. Machines beeped steadily beside her, each sound a cruel reminder of how close she had come to death. He reached for her hand. It was cold, yet familiar. That hand had once held his when he was too scared to walk to school. That hand had fed him, bathed him, protected him. Now it lay limp, bruised by the harshness of life and the indifference of her own son. Emeka's throat tightened. "Mama," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He bowed his head, resting it against her hand as tears flowed freely. "I should have brought you here myself. I should have never hidden you." For hours, he sat there, watching, waiting, hoping for a sign. A twitch, a movement, anything. At one point, the doctor entered and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "She's stable but weak," he said. "The exposure to cold was severe. If she wakes up soon, she'll need rehabilitation. If not," he trailed off. Those words haunted Emeka for the rest of the day. He couldn't leave her side, not even to eat. Nurses tried to convince him to rest, but he refused. This was his penance. He stared at her frail body, remembering the stories she used to tell him at night, the ones about gods and warriors, of love and loss. He had never known then that she was the real warrior, the real god in his life. And he had let her down. He remembered how she always smiled, even when she was tired. how she gave him the bigger portion of food and took blame when he got in trouble at school. He thought of the night she had slept in the rain outside his wedding, in the same way she had now. But this time, the consequences were more than emotional. This time, her life was on the line. He leaned closer, his tears soaking the bedsheet. "Wake up, Mama," he begged. "Please wake up. I'll fix everything. I'll bring you home. I'll tell the world who you are." That evening, her eyelids fluttered. Emeka jumped to his feet, pressing the call button for the nurses. Slowly, her eyes opened, unfocused at first. She turned her head weakly and saw him. A faint smile curved her lips. "My son," she whispered. "I found you." Emeka choked on his tears, nodding rapidly. "Yes, Mama. I'm here. I'm here now." The nurse entered, checked her vitals, and confirmed her consciousness had returned. Emeka wanted to fall on his knees in gratitude. "You'll be okay, Mama. I'll never leave you again." But her eyes clouded with a different pain, not physical, but emotional. "Why, Emeka?" she asked softly. "Why didn't you open the door?" The words hit him like a hammer to the chest. He broke into fresh sobs, holding her hand tightly. "I was foolish. I wanted to hide you from shame. But I was the shameful one." She closed her eyes and whispered, "I forgive you, but my heart is tired." And though she lived through that night, Emeka knew her spirit had been broken long before the rain had ever touched her skin. When Emeka returned home the next morning, his face was drawn and hollow, but his steps were filled with new purpose. He entered the house without a word and went straight to the dining area, where Adiz was sipping coffee in silence. She looked up nervously, unsure of what to expect. "She's awake," he said flatly, "but weak. The doctors say she might recover fully, but it will take time." Adiz opened her mouth to say something, but paused. "That's good," she managed. Emeka placed the photograph on the table. "Look at this," he said. She picked it up and stared. It was Emeka, as a boy, sitting on a woman's lap. Her features were unmistakable. Adiz's face paled. "That's her?" she asked, voice trembling. "That woman." Emeka nodded. "That's my mother. The woman who carried me when no one else did. The woman you left in the rain like a stray animal." Adiz's lip quivered. "You lied to me. You told me she was dead." "Because I knew the truth wouldn't survive in this house," he snapped. "You don't respect the poor. You don't value kindness. I was scared you'd make her feel small, and I was right." Adiz lowered her gaze, unable to meet his eyes. For the first time, her pride deserted her. "I didn't know. I didn't know it was her." "You didn't care to know," Emeka replied coldly. "You saw an old, disabled woman and made your judgment. You slammed the door without asking her name. That was all it took." The words hung in the air, thick with disappointment. Adiz tried to defend herself, but found nothing to say. She rose slowly, walked to the window, and stared outside. "What can I do?" she whispered. Emeka didn't answer. He simply walked away. Later that day, Nkechi approached Adiz in the kitchen. "Madam, I just want to say I'm sorry for speaking out of place." Adiz looked at her for a long moment. "No, you were right," she said quietly. "You were the only one who showed her compassion." She reached into her purse and handed Nkechi an envelope. "Take the day off. Go and visit your family." Nkechi stared in surprise, unsure if this was guilt or change. That evening, Adiz dressed modestly for the first time in years. No makeup, no jewelry. She carried a small food flask and made her way to the hospital alone. When she arrived at the ward, Emeka was seated beside his mother. He looked up surprised. Adiz walked in slowly and dropped to her knees beside the bed. "Mama," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "I am so sorry. I didn't know. I was blind. I was cruel. Please forgive me." Mama Neka looked at her weakly, her expression unreadable. "Pride," she said softly. "Pride is heavier than any rain." Then she turned her face to the wall and closed her eyes, leaving Adiz kneeling on the cold floor, unsure if forgiveness would ever come. The following days dragged slowly, each one weighed down by shame, silence, and reflection. Adiz remained indoors most of the time, her usual confident gait now reduced to unsure, quiet steps. The house that once rang with the sound of her voice was now cloaked in an unfamiliar quiet. She barely touched her food and couldn't bring herself to scroll through social media, which used to be her favorite pastime. Instead, she sat in the living room, staring at the photograph of Emeka and his mother, tracing the outlines with her fingertips like a sinner handling a sacred relic. Her heart felt like a battlefield, torn between self-hatred and a desperate need for redemption. She had always prided herself on being a strong modern woman, but she was now beginning to realize that strength without compassion was just cruelty in disguise. She remembered her mother-in-law's trembling hands, her soaked clothes, her quiet, pleading eyes, and she knew that she had done something that could never be fully undone. Each time Emeka returned from the hospital, Adiz tried to engage him, but he offered only brief nods or a simple good night. The distance between them was growing like a wall of ice, and for once, Adiz couldn't blame anyone but herself. Her heart grew heavier every time she walked past the guest room, which Emeka had quietly prepared for his mother's return, should she recover. He had filled it with new bedsheets, warm blankets, and soft lights. He even placed a bowl of oranges beside the bed, just the way he remembered his mother loved. Watching her husband transform into a devoted son filled Adiz with envy and sorrow. She had taken so much pride in being the center of his life, but now she saw a version of Emeka that was fuller, deeper, more real, one she had never bothered to know. And that realization stung worse than any insult. The truth was, she had never cared about his past. She only cared about what he could offer her in the present. Adiz began to spend more time with Nkechi, trying to understand the compassion she had seen in her that night. The house help was hesitant at first, unsure if this was another trick or a temporary mood. But soon, the walls began to come down. Adiz listened to her stories of growing up in poverty, of losing her mother early, of learning kindness not from comfort, but from pain. One night, after Nkechi left the kitchen, Adiz remained behind and cried for a long time. Not because she had been caught, not because she had been embarrassed, but because she had finally seen herself for what she truly was. And what she saw wasn't beautiful. She knew apologies wouldn't be enough, but she also knew she had to try. She began to plan her next visit to the hospital, not as a formality, but as a genuine act of repentance. Whether her mother-in-law forgave her or not, she needed to face the consequences of her arrogance and learn to become the kind of woman Emeka's mother would be proud to call a daughter. At the hospital, Emeka sat beside his mother's bed, his fingers gently massaging her hands as she rested. Her breathing was more stable now, and the color had returned to her face, though she remained mostly silent. She had not spoken much since waking up, only responding with nods or brief glances. Emeka interpreted the silence as disappointment, a quiet form of punishment more painful than any spoken words. He leaned closer and began to talk, not because he expected her to answer, but because he needed her to know. He confessed everything, from the lies he told Adiz about her being dead, to the shame he felt about their background, to the fear of losing his wife's respect if she found out who his mother truly was. "I was a coward," he said, his voice trembling. "I thought I was protecting you, but I was protecting my pride. I was scared she wouldn't love me if she knew I came from a woman who limped through life just to feed me." As he continued, tears poured freely from his eyes, and his shoulders shook from the weight of suppressed guilt. "You gave me everything, Mama, everything. And I paid you with silence. I let you sleep in the rain. I let her slam the door on you. And when you collapsed, I wasn't there." He covered his face with both hands and wept. The room remained still, except for the steady hum of the machines and his muffled sobs. Then, a frail hand reached out and touched his wrist. He looked up, eyes swollen. Mama Nneka was looking at him, her expression soft but deeply wounded. "Emeka," she said in a whisper that still carried strength, "you let the world change you, but I still see my son, the one who cried in my arms when he scraped his knee, the one I carried with one arm and protected with the other." Emeka broke down again, resting his head on her chest. "Forgive me, Mama, please." Mama Neka closed her eyes and held him close, her fingers brushing his hair slowly. I forgive you, she whispered. But promise me you will never let the world turn your heart cold again. Emeka nodded against her chest, crying harder now, not just from guilt, but from the overwhelming grace she had shown him. I promise, he said. I promise. For the first time since she arrived at his gate, peace passed between them. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was quiet, like healing often is. As they remained in that embrace, Emeka knew that no matter what happened next, he would make it his life's mission to honor the woman who had given him everything, and expected nothing in return but love. Later that week, Adiz finally returned to the hospital, this time dressed simply, her face bare of makeup, her expression one of humility. She carried a tray of warm yam porridge, freshly made, just the way Emeka had described his mother liked it. She rehearsed her apology over and over again on the way, even though she knew words could never be enough. When she stepped into the room, Emeka looked up, expression unreadable. Mama Neka turned her head slowly, her eyes narrowing slightly when she saw her. Adiz approached and dropped to her knees beside the bed. Mama, she said softly, her voice shaking. I came to say I'm sorry. Not because I got caught. Not because it's expected. But because I see now what I was blind to. I judged you. I insulted you. I shut the door on love disguised as humility. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I still beg for it. She placed the food on the side table and looked down, ashamed. The silence that followed was thick. Mama Neka looked at her for a long time, her face unreadable. Then, with a weak voice, she said, You wear humility like a borrowed gown. But even borrowed clothes can be worn sincerely. Adiz looked up slowly, tears filling her eyes. I know I failed you, Mama. I failed Emeka. I failed myself. I want to make it right. But Mama Neka turned her face toward the window. Some doors, once closed, do not open the same way again. The words were not cruel. They were honest, heavy with the pain of rejection, soaked in dignity. Emeka said nothing. He simply stood and adjusted his mother's pillow. Adiz remained kneeling, trembling, unsure whether to leave or stay. Eventually, Mama Neka spoke again. If you truly want to make things right, don't do it for me. Do it for the girl you see in the mirror. Become someone whose apology is seen in actions, not just words. Adiz nodded quickly, wiping her tears. I will. I will. She stood slowly, feeling like a child scolded by a teacher she deeply respected. As she turned to leave, she heard Mama Neka call out weakly, Tell the girl in the mirror that I see her. I see her trying. But I'm tired now. Adiz paused, a sob catching in her throat. She walked out silently, but this time with new resolve. She knew forgiveness would not come wrapped in a bow. It would have to be earned, layer by layer, through patience, sacrifice, and change. That night, she returned home and told Nkechi, From tomorrow, I want to cook. And I want you to teach me everything. Nkechi stared in shock, then smiled faintly. Perhaps redemption was not denied. It was simply delayed until it could be deserved. The days that followed were filled with slow healing and quiet reflection. Mama Neka remained in the hospital, growing physically stronger, but emotionally distant. Her silence spoke volumes, more than tears, more than rage. Emeka visited every day without fail, feeding her, reading to her, and recounting memories from their past, hoping to see a smile, a flicker of the warmth she once showered on him. But though she listened, her expressions remained calm, reserved. Forgiveness had been given, but the wound it covered was still raw. She no longer spoke of coming to live with them or seeing the city as a place of joy. Take me home, she whispered one morning. To my compound. To my mango tree. That's where I want to be. Emeka protested, insisting she stay until she was fully recovered. But Mama Neka was resolute. I have seen enough of gates, Emeka. Let me rest where the door is always open. Her discharge from the hospital came a week later. Emeka had arranged for a private nurse, a new mattress, and a transport van to make her journey home more comfortable. Adiz offered to accompany them, but Mama Neka declined. This part of my journey I take alone, she said gently. Emeka helped her into the van, his heart heavy with unspoken sorrow. As they reached her village, neighbors gathered in shock and joy to welcome her back. The old women ululated, and the children danced. But Mama Neka said little. She simply smiled, lifted her hand in blessing, and let herself be led back into her small home. Emeka followed, standing quietly in the same room where he'd once slept on mats beside her, back when love was simple and poverty was shared with laughter. That night, he sat by her feet and cried, "I will build you a new house, Mama. I will give you the best care. I will stay here with you if you want." But she only stroked his hair and said, "Just promise me you'll raise your children to know that a good name is better than gold." Early the next morning, before the rooster crowed, Mama Neka breathed her last. No pain, no struggle, just a deep, peaceful sigh. The nurse on duty called Emeka, who rushed to her side in disbelief. She lay there, her hands clasped on her chest, her lips parted as if mid-prayer. Emeka fell to his knees, wailing like a child. "Mama, no, I just got you back." But her journey was complete. She had given all she had, and now she had gone to rest. The entire village mourned, and her burial was attended by hundreds, neighbors, market women, even strangers who had once tasted her roasted corn. Emeka buried her beside the mango tree, just as she wanted. And as the final handful of sand covered her grave, he stood tall, eyes to the sky, and whispered, "I will never close another door again." Days after the funeral, as Emeka sat in Mama Neka's now empty room, sifting through her belongings with quiet reverence, he stumbled upon a folded piece of paper tucked into the lining of her wrapper. It was worn at the edges and smelled faintly of her lavender soap. Carefully he opened it. It was a letter, written in his mother's shaky handwriting. "To my dearest son," it began. Emeka's hands trembled. The words on the page pierced him deeper than any rebuke could have. She had written it before coming to the city, unsure if she would ever return. "If I don't come back," she wrote, "please don't cry too long. I lived for you. I limped through life, not because I was weak, but because I was strong enough to carry you forward. Everything I did was so you could fly higher than I ever could. I only ever wanted you to be kind, to remember." Emeka's tears soaked the page as he read on. She wrote about the years she waited, the birthdays she remembered alone, the weddings she heard of from others, the grandchildren she dreamed of holding but never did. Yet in all of it, there was no anger, only longing and love. "I missed you every day," she wrote, "but I also prayed for you every day. And when I saw you with your wife, I hoped she would bring you peace. I hoped she would see in you what I saw." Emeka wept uncontrollably, clutching the letter to his chest. It was not just a message, it was a lifeline, a testament of love unshaken by betrayal. Her final words were the ones that would stay with him forever. "Son, when you open the door to your heart, do not forget who helped build it." He showed the letter to Adiz later that night. She read it in silence, her face wet with tears before she even finished. "She was a better woman than I'll ever be," she said, voice cracking. Emeka shook his head. "No, but she became that woman through pain. I don't want us to live like this, Adiz. I don't want a house built on pride." Adiz nodded, her lips trembling. "I want to change, not for show, not to make it up to you, but because I see now. I see everything." They both agreed to do more than mourn. They would honor her, not just with a plaque or a picture on the wall, but with a life that would carry her legacy, a life that would treat every stranger as a potential mother. And from that day, Emeka began to build, not structures, but a foundation of truth, humility, and compassion that would never allow a door to slam shut again. The weeks turned into months, and Adiz's transformation was slow but visible. She no longer barked at staff or dismissed strangers. She began attending community meetings, volunteering at a home for the elderly, and cooking meals every Sunday for a small orphanage nearby. People noticed the change, but more importantly, she felt it. Guilt no longer drove her actions. Remembrance did. She thought of Mama Neka in everything she did. Every pot of soup she prepared, every child she smiled at, every elderly woman She helped cross the road. The woman who had once worn arrogance like a crown now wore humility like a second skin. At night, she often sat by Emeka, reading books about forgiveness and redemption. Their home felt warmer, quieter, fuller. The silence that once screamed now whispered peace. And, in that peace, Adiz found something she had never known before, meaning. Emeka, too, began to live differently. He started a foundation in his mother's name, dedicated to caring for elderly women in rural communities. He spoke openly at seminars and church events about shame, neglect, and the damage silence can cause. Don't be ashamed of your roots, he would say. Honor them, or you'll lose more than just your story. You'll lose your soul. He made frequent trips to the village, planting trees in his mother's memory, hosting medical outreaches, and building a proper home where her hut once stood. He didn't do it out of guilt anymore. He did it out of love. A love that had been buried under wealth and pride, but was now resurrected with purpose. When he stood beside her grave on her birthday, he whispered, "I am becoming the man you raised. I promise." Adiz joined him on those visits, and each time she would kneel beside Mama Neka's grave and speak softly. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I hope you see me now. I hope I am finally the woman worthy of your son's love." She would place fresh flowers on the grave, sometimes with a note, sometimes with a simple thank you. The village women grew fond of her, calling her Neoma for her kindness. Nkechi remained with them, not as a servant, but as family. The house no longer felt like a fortress, it felt like a home. One built on tears, truth, and a mother's memory. One where the door would always remain open. It was a calm Saturday evening, nearly a year after Mama Neka's passing. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow across the compound, and the breeze carried with it the sweet scent of freshly watered flowers from the garden Adiz now tended herself. The duplex had changed in more ways than one. The gate that once stood like a fortress had been replaced with a modest wooden frame that remained open during daylight. Emeka and Adiz had agreed. No one deserving of shelter should ever have to knock in fear. A small sign hung by the entrance now. "The door is open." That phrase had become more than a message. It was a vow. That evening, Emeka played on the lawn with children from the orphanage they sponsored, while Adiz prepared jollof rice for the dinner they hosted every weekend for neighbors and the less privileged. As Adiz stirred the pot, she heard a gentle knock, not at the gate, but at the front door. She wiped her hands and walked to it. There, standing quietly in the fading sunlight, was an old woman. She was bent, with swollen feet and sun-darkened skin. Her eyes were tired, and her clothes were stained with dust from a road. She had a small bag with her and a faint limp in her left leg. Adiz froze. The image was too familiar, too reminiscent of a night that had changed everything. Her throat tightened as she remembered the first time she had seen such a woman, how she had turned her away, locked the door, and unknowingly left Emeka's mother to suffer. But this time was different. This time she saw her, truly saw her. Adiz didn't ask who she was. She didn't demand to know why she was there. Instead, she stepped forward, held the woman's hand gently, and said, "Come in, Mama. You deserve better than to stand outside." Tears filled the old woman's eyes as she was led inside, not as a stranger, but as a guest. Adiz fetched a towel, warm water, slippers, and clean clothes. She helped the woman bathe, fed her, and let her rest in the same guest room that had been prepared for Mama Neka a year ago. When Emeka walked in and saw the woman lying peacefully on the guest bed, his eyes met Adiz, and for a long moment neither spoke. Then he walked to her, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "She would have been proud of you." Adiz nodded, her eyes shining with emotion. "She changed me, Emeka. I thought I had everything, but she taught me what really matters." They stood together in silence, hand in hand, as the sounds of children laughing echoed from outside. The door that had once closed so harshly was now a symbol of transformation, a symbol of redemption, a symbol of love. And as night fell, the home that once shunned a mother now embraced the world, one stranger at a time. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.